What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and as you guys know, when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, leaks and rumors and things like that come out seemingly all the time. And so while these leaks are not necessarily brand new, in fact, they've kind of been around since October of last year, what is coming out is a lot of information from the back, which is really just kind of confirming these leaks as seemingly being accurate. Now, if you guys don't know what these are, they've kind of been the talk of the town for the last couple days or so, not necessarily overshadowing Batman, but they have been a big talk among the Marvel Cinematic Universe community. So let's talk about the first one. Now, here's what the first leak says. The mid-credit scene is Doctor Strange sleeping after the events of the Multiverse of Madness, and he has a nightmare where he sees himself training an apprentice, a ruined New York City, a dead Wong, Dormammu's sister Umar, and a glimpse of Kang the Conqueror. He then wakes up with a third eye and hears the voice of Clea saying, "Help me." Now again, because it's kind of coming out that these leaks are seemingly accurate, this is really, really cool. Clea and Umar are probably the coolest part of this. Okay, so let's talk about Umar for a second, because a lot of you guys know what's going on with the idea of like Dormammu, right? This guy who rules the dark dimension, all that kind of stuff. In the comics, Dormammu has a sister, and his sister's name is Umar. And depending on who's writing the story, sometimes she's more powerful than Dormammu. Usually she's not. Marvel Comics is very inconsistent with power levels and who's more powerful than who, and it really depends on when and all that kind of stuff. A really good example of this is back in the 60s when Doctor Strange was introduced, he could basically do anything he wanted to. He could stop time, he could time travel, he could alter reality on a universal scale. There was no limit to what he could do. But it was almost impossible to tell stories about him. So they wrote this story where basically he was brought in by the Vishanti, who give him like a bulk of his power. He was supposed to fight a war in their name. He refused to, so they stripped him of the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme and then eventually gave it back to him, but he was like 50% less powerful than he was before, something along those lines. So again, that kind of stuff shifts all the time in Marvel Comics. Now here's the deal with Dormammu and Umar. So in Marvel Comics, the Fall Teen hail from a dimension which is literally just pure magical energy, right? They are beings made of magic. So if magic could get up and walk around, it would be the Fall Teen. They could do all kinds of crazy stuff. Now they're not all powerful, and that is something that I want to specify here, but they are incredibly powerful. The way it originally played out is that the Fall Teens themselves basically just kind of exist in their realm. That Umar and Dormammu had actually become interested in like emotions and effectively what you would call the elements of being a sentient being, right? Of being human, essentially. And because that was basically an outcast, they ultimately ended up getting engaged in some actions. They ended up killing their mentor. They were ultimately exiled from the Fall Teen dimension. They took up residence in the dark dimension, conquered it, and have been ruling it ever since. But the thing about Umar is that she offers another part to this equation. Now, if this is true with it being Umar, this is really, really intriguing here. The reason being because we don't really know much about Dormammu himself, let alone the potential of introducing Umar, right? So basically we're taking a person that we know almost nothing about and we're introducing his sister. And so it's kind of like, okay, I mean, we don't really even know anything about that guy. Like how are we supposed to go in terms of knowing anything about his sister? But the important thing here is that with these two people being in the MCU, the potential of them expanding the dark dimension and giving us more information, showing us more things, this is a cool concept. I still believe that Dormammu is in some form or fashion going to have a hand in Doctor Strange 2. Again, I'm not swearing by that, but that's my theory, that he's going to be involved in some way. He's really more of a coming together of just the kind of beings like Mephisto and Nightmare and so on that we would expect. Again, it's kind of a theory that I have. But the other part of this is Clea. Now, Clea is really, really cool in the Doctor Strange mythos. Initially, she was a protege. Then she became his girlfriend. Then she became his wife. Then she divorced him and took half his stuff. That's not true. She actually ended up becoming a ruler of the dark dimension for a time. But Clea is one of these characters where she is potentially exceedingly powerful. What it's also doing is expanding on the Doctor Strange mythos. Now, having Clea there in the picture, as you guys know, when it comes to the MCU, usually when they introduce a new character, it's kind of in with the new, out with the old. That's kind of what seems to happen. So while I wouldn't say that they are going to get rid of Wong, I wouldn't be surprised if Wong falls to more of a background role if Clea really is going to become like the new protege of Doctor Strange. But going into the kind of post-credit scene, because with that mid-credit scene itself, it is really cool. The post-credit scene is a lot more interesting and actually gives us a lot of insight in terms of what's going on with Doctor Strange 2, particularly the role the Illuminati play. The end credit scene is Deadpool along with Cable, Domino, and Vanessa exploring the Illuminati facility due to the Illuminati's multiversal gates being left open after the fight with Wanda. Deadpool is joking with the bodies of some members, including making a reference to The Office. Deadpool then makes a joke while breaking the fourth wall about Patrick Stewart's Professor X being dead again for the third time. So again, with people kind of coming out and being like, yeah, man, these are pretty accurate. That looks like that's what's going to happen in the movie. One of the cool things about this, right, what's really, really cool about this is one, it brings Deadpool into the MCU, right? I mean, we knew it was coming. We knew that was going to happen. I imagine that if this really is the case, the top's going to come off that place, right? Like, I imagine what'll happen is it'll basically be like it'll just be like the empty facility, and then like Deadpool will just peek his head around the corner and be like, hello? Anybody here? Like, you guys know what I mean, like in true Deadpool fashion. It'll be like Cable and Vanessa and Domino and them walking in there and just be like, come on, Wade, you know, but like, it's cool. Now, there are a couple things here, right? The idea of him making a reference to The Office is obviously based on the idea that John Krasinski is playing Reed Richards. The other part of this is that with him making a joke, of course, that Patrick Stewart's dead for the third time, that Patrick Stewart dies in the movie. Now, to me, this is pretty cool because if this is true, it also gives us massive insight into what's gonna happen in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Doctor Strange 2 and even beyond. The first thing is that with Patrick Stewart, quote unquote, dying for a third time, I imagine they probably won't bring him back. That the Professor X that we get in the X-Men movies in the MCU will be a wholly different person, completely different, right? It won't be Patrick Stewart, maybe it's James McAvoy, I doubt it would be him. It would just be a wholly different person that we've never seen play the role before. Now, the other thing about this, and if it's true, it's actually kind of disappointing that John Krasinski would play Reed Richards. The reason why is because unless Reed survives the events of Doctor Strange 2, escapes whatever the destruction of the Illuminati facility happens to be, or however things unfold, and essentially takes off and lands in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, then what that means is essentially seeing John Krasinski play Reed Richards is a one-off. That it's just one of those things where potentially they're doing it because fans have just been asking for it for so long, but once we actually get the Fantastic Four as a team properly introduced into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it'll be somebody completely different, which really begs the question, if you could pick one person to play Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four in the MCU who is not John Krasinski, who would you pick? And you can't pick the guy from the original Fantastic Four movies either. You can't pick him. We're not gonna bring him back. Somebody totally different, someone who's never played the role before. Who would you pick to play that role? But again, this is kind of a cool thing. Now, in terms of like Krasinski potentially jumping ship and landing in the MCU, that's happened before. And we've talked about that, right? I mean, that's one of the big things that happens with the Marvel Cinematic Universe now. And we can leave comics out of it. I mean, there's ample stories in Marvel Comics where like a universe is being destroyed or dying. Some of the denizens basically jump ship and they land in a new universe. That's how you got the original X-Man, Nate Gray, just this stupidly overpowered mutant in the main Marvel Universe. We saw it with Days of Future Past and Days of Future Present with Rachel Summers. We've seen it with like the Mad Jim Jaspers storyline. We saw it with Hyperion from Earth 13034 during Secret Wars in 2015 by Jonathan Hickman, when he literally held two universes apart for the span of like 5 or 6 minutes. He ultimately couldn't hold it. And even when the universes crashed into each other and they were destroyed, he still lived. Ultimately, he was grabbed by Advanced Idea Mechanics. He was brought into the main Marvel Universe and was basically the main Marvel Universe's most recent iteration of Superman. I'm sorry, I love Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers. Single greatest comic book story ever told. I don't care what anyone says, it's phenomenal. Just, man. Son. I swear to God, I feel like I can never make one of these videos without talking about how amazing Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four or Avengers and New Avengers run is. That's just the way that it is. But the thing about this is that the MCU itself, Loki gave us that, right? Loki showed us that, like, one, it's possible to travel between universes across the multiverse, and that two, a person can jump ship from what's basically a dead universe into another universe, or jump from a live universe into a dead universe. Loki and Sylvie did it constantly, right? They were jumping from universe to universe, right? Reality to reality. Sylvie had been doing it her whole life. Loki was only more recently introduced to it. Now, seemingly, if we borrow from Loki, the idea or the ability to jump from one universe to the next using technological means, so leaving out somebody like America Chavez, that it is potentially tied to operating outside of space and time. It makes it easier to do, right? The TVA existed outside of the multiverse. Well, technically at the very end of the multiverse, but still, right? At that point, all timelines converge into the end of all things, so basically outside of the multiverse. The thing about this, though, is that if this is really Reed Richards as we know him, like the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Reed Richards, which would be more heavily based on the intelligence of Reed in the comics, as opposed to the old school Fantastic Four films, this guy figured out how to access the multiverse years ago. And I wouldn't even be slightly surprised if Reed Richards in the entire Illuminati facility, the multiversal gates, so the ability to access the multiverse, if that was all Reed, if Reed was the one who figured out how to do that, he had the technology and the means means to achieve it, and in essence, along with whatever the variant of Iron Man happens to be in the Illuminati, had basically built up their entire fortress and then gave them the ability to access the multiversal gates. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, right? Being able to access the multiverse in Marvel Comics can be done in just 1,000 different ways, right? There's just so many different ways to do it. But regardless, I think this is really cool, right? So I would say that while it is slightly disappointing that we would see John Krasinski played Reed Richards in Doctor Strange 2, with the potential being that they would kill him off, it would be awesome if he actually survives. He basically escapes that and then ends up taking off to the main Marvel Universe. The biggest question you have to ask here, and the biggest issue with that, is how do you get the rest of the Fantastic Four? Because I have a hard time believing that John Krasinski's Reed Richards in Doctor Strange 2, right? Like everything's popping off and he's like, okay, we gotta get out of here, like everything's collapsing, you know, and he's like, okay, well, I'll just leave my wife and family and I'll just go here and start a new one, right? I don't know if that would be the case. Now, it is possible, and this is a really, really cool thing that I just kind of happened to think of a second ago. It is possible that version of Reed and the Fantastic Four hailed from a reality that was destroyed. Whether it was done by like Wanda, or whether it was done by like Dormammu, or whatever this kind of background menacing larger threat on a multiversal scale happens to be, right? Whatever that case is, it could be they were like some of the last survivors. So the Fantastic Four, as we know them, right? Reed, Ben, Johnny, Sue, they exist in the Illuminati facility, right? Reed's family's just, you know, chilling, relaxing, maxing out cool and shooting some b-ball outside of the school when a couple of guys who were up to no good started making trouble in the neighborhood. But nonetheless, you know, it's entirely possible they're just there and chilling, and we only really see Reed, or maybe we see him meet with like the rest of his family, so we know the whole Fantastic Four is there. That gives them the ability to leave and then show up in the main Marvel Universe. I don't know, at this point I'm kind of rambling and just theorizing. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. But let me know who you guys want to play Reed. That I am serious about. If you could pick one person to play Reed Richards in the Marvel Cinematic Universe who has not played him yet, let me know who you think that person should be. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.